Everyone is welcome here, it's time to make new friends. Aquavit Euskava, fill your Glencairn. Share a dram with the spirit of Edmonton. Luncha!
Good day, Whiskey Brothers, Whiskey Sisters, Whiskey Friends, and welcome to the Whiskey Book Club's third book of Season 3 with Dr. Don Livermore, this guy right here. And we're dealing with this book right here. So Blending 101. Beautiful book, the Canadian Whiskey Masterclass. It is volume 2 of the 2 that came out. This is the first one that came out. And I think these would be a fantastic gift over Christmas if you're looking for those. I think they'd be very good. But we're dealing with Blending 101 and really happy to. And I'm really excited to have you guys with us on here tonight as well. So let's just say there's other whiskey book clubs out there, but none that delve so deeply into the subject that we're going to go to in tonight. And my name's Dolph. I'm the president of the Alberta Scotch Society. I'm the founder of the Whiskey Book Club. I'm your host tonight. And for those of you new to the Whiskey Book Club, I'll explain a bit what we're about. We are a home base. We are a safe place for whiskey geeks that love to share a dram and share a passion for reading generally about whiskey-related books. So this book, and I'll show it again, is the 14th book that we've reviewed on the Whiskey Book Club. And the first one I didn't mention, it's called The Keeper of History, the Canadian Whiskey Masterclass, Volume 1. So, Don, you were busy with those. So, welcome, Don.
Thank you, Dolph. It's a pleasure to be back on the program again. And it was a lot of fun writing both books, actually. Yes.
Well, going from master blender to author, it's a big one. So, Don's done a lot. I'm gonna do a little bit of his bio, because he might be a little bit shy. I'm going to do it. So, master blender at JP Weiser since 2012. But it all got started at University of Waterloo, Bachelor of Science. And I don't know if it was specializing in microbiology, but that was your first job there. And that was 1995. 1996, he joins Hiram Walker. And early in his career, he developed, I have to read this, a technique using near-infrared reflectance spectrometry, which measures how light scatters off and through a sample. It cut the time needed to analyze alcohol, sugar, and acid content from hours to seconds and changed how the entire distilling industry monitored its fermentation processes. So that is very impressive. And that was early in his career. After that, he gets his master's and doctorate at Heriot-Watt in Edinburgh, and he focuses attention on wood and aging. And that was your doctorate. Was that your master's as well?
My master's was based around that fermentation science. So it's all using near-infrared spectrometry. That's how you see it, Dolph.
Near? So, no, do it again.
NIR for short. NIR for short. Near-infrared spectrometry.
Okay. I always just called it a mass spectrometer. Is that something different?
That's something different.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. I tried. Thanks.
Yes.
I was a biology guy in high school, and when I went to university, it's biology, not chemistry, not physics like you did. So, you didn't like physics as much. You said you liked the chemistry, and you can tell in the book. You really do. You got a passion for it. What are you drinking tonight?
Well, I'm going to do our one of our latest releases is the Lot 40 Peated Quarter Cask. So this is the Rye Exploration Series #1, and we hope to launch many more Lot 40 different variants. 3,120 bottles of this was released across Canada. Each one numbered, and it's at cask strength at 55.5% ABV, non-chill filtered, no caramel coloring in this one. It's all straight from the cask. Lot 40 and the Peated Quarter Cask. So, yeah.
And what wood's that from? Was that the Eastern European wood?
Well, we started out in once used American bourbon barrels, and then I moved it over to the Peated Quarter Casks. So I'm not sure where the Peated Quarter Casks, I know where they came from because we buy them from a third party barrel broker. Since Lot 40 is such a tiny brand, to partner with one exclusive company, it doesn't marry quite well. So when we go to unique barrel variety, third party brokers will sell you them. So, and they wouldn't tell me where they acquired them from. So I always tell people, guess where do you think they came from? And I get them all kinds of ranges with Scotch. But the beautiful thing about this whiskey here, it's marrying probably your most intense flavors that you get in whiskey. You got 100% rye whiskey like Lot 40, and then you got your peated. It is such a unique offering. I'm not sure if anybody else does anything quite like it. They may. If it is, it's rare. So it's certainly one of my favorite whiskeys that we've developed at the Hiram Walker Distillery. So.
And the wood coming through with it as well. The quarter cask just amplifying that wood as well. And we had this 2 years in a row, and I'm going to push up. Let's throw up a picture because you presented to the Alberta Scotch Society, and that's you with one of them.
I look rather busy there.
You're look at all those books. Buddy.
Actually, that's probably it's pertinent. I was actually writing my book at the time. That's why all those books are on my table there.
Perfect.
So what you see in the Blending 101, a lot of that information is coming out. Those are the original recipe books at Hiram Walker Distillery.
Well, serendipitous that I brought it out tonight.
Yeah,
I like that. That's good. We're on the same wavelength, buddy. And that's why I'm drinking tonight. And I thought this was great. We talked about you become a master blender, and this is your foray from one master blender into another. I love this. And not very much left tonight. This might be gone by the end of the night. So we'll say goodbye to a nice friend tonight.
Whiskey's meant to be drank. So I still have inventory to make that one again if we have to. So you'll never know. Good. We'll hopefully we can see it sometime in the future. Good.
Well, I have one still, but I've been drinking this, but that's been to save. So if another one comes out, I can drink that. All right.
Yeah.
Let's delve right into the questions because we got a lot of questions and you're on a tight timeline. So
cheers. Cheers, by the way.
All right.
Virtual cheers, yes.
That's lovely. It really is. When we first talked about doing this, you mentioned that you were surprised that I chose this book as opposed to the history one. And I've only read halfway. So I'm at the halfway point because I don't read ahead when I do this. We're doing the next half next week. The information that we're covering today, I'm enjoying the technical aspect of it all. I really am. But I was wondering when I was reading this, who is your public cible? Who's your target audience when you wrote this book? Because I don't think this is for everybody.
Yeah. So there are two books in the series. And just to kind of go back to it, the first one's called The Keeper of History. And that one was titled after what my previous boss had called me. He said, Don, you're the keeper of history. And I said, well, yeah, okay. That's interesting. Yeah, I can memorize all things Canadian whiskey. You know, Davin's a great resource and Canadian whiskey history. He says, no, that's not what I mean by it. He said, you're the keeper of history to understand why we do the things we do. You're the one that has to remember certain interactions. You're the one that has to remember, why do we filter it this way? Or why did we add the ingredients in this order? Or why did we do this? And it's your job to tell that story and to be able to pass it on to the next generation. So that was the motivation of writing a book. I had written a lot of this stuff through the years, trying to, train the next generation coming on and leaving that Dr. Don legacy out there. And COVID being at home, as you saw my kitchen table there, allowed me to put this lot of stuff right. And that was the motivation at first. And I did write one book. And I kind of threw it to our marketing department. I said, what do you think of Dr. Don writing a book? Oh, we love it. Certainly, because it brings notoriety to the brands that we make at the Hiram Walker Distillery. Yeah. And as they got reading it, they said, there's actually two books here. And so I split them in two. So the first book is a little bit more the history, and it's about myself and what I brought to the industry in my last 25 years. So it's an interesting read, and what footprint did me as a master blender through this era provide to the Canadian whiskey category. So that's what that first book's about. And the second book I wanted to bring to life a lot of the stuff I talk about in my master classes. I know, Adolph, you've had a chance to sit in a number of them. And it's a little bit more technical, but it's really based around that flavor wheel. And I'm sure if you, somewhere in that book, I don't know which page number it is on, is the flavor wheel. Yeah.
Got that.
Yeah. And it's really the mindset of a blender. And what do I think about to bring in flavors to the whiskey? And I'm sure you've gone through the first half of it already. Wow, you got it highlighted.
Oh man, you should see how many highlights I got. It's all orange in here. It's the first half. when you find everything interesting, it's stupid when I used to study this way. Yeah, this is important. I highlight them.
That's Euler orange, by the way.
It is. It works very well with it. Yeah. So there was a lot that I found really interesting. Awesome.
Yeah, and I hope in the first half of it is I go right all the way back to the grain, and I go through fermentation, and I go through the wood science as to my thoughts of bringing flavors into whiskey. It's the watch outs for a blender. I don't think there's any books out there specifically on blending. There's no book when I started. It's all passed down information from one blender to another, and things that you learn along the way. And I think if you really are serious about learning how to blend whiskey, hence the title, Blending 101, this is where we can bring in flavors and to make of that. The second part of the book, as we'll probably talk about this week, is this is more of a high level, but it is actually the history of blending. Why do we blend?
Okay.
So I actually talk about the very first recipes in Canada and how blending has evolved.
Okay.
It's changed through the last century and a half, and how we do it today. And then I talk about things in the second half of the book that are stressful points in the industry today, about like caramel coloring and chill filtration and things like that. Why do we do that? Or is it for real or not for real? So I put those things to the test, and it is a little bit of a challenging second half of the book when we read that, but it's truly blending 101 right from the very beginning. And my objective to write the book is I hope that it brings to life how Canadian whiskey is made, where we came from, the roots, and challenge some of the misnomers that are out there. That is it marketing or is it for real, kind of thing, right? So it's I challenge that in the second part of that book. So I don't think there's any book like it. I've had a few people. I haven't had a full review from anybody. You're maybe one of the first people I talked to about this yet, but I think from what I see so far, it's really challenges, and it's out there for those really whiskey enthusiasts. I know there's lots of books around whiskey and how whiskey's made, but the secret of blending is now opened up.
And I haven't seen it. And I've got a lot of whiskey books. I've been reading whiskey books for a long time. Never seen anything like it, and it's refreshing, and I love it. And I love the originality of it. But it does. It makes me feel like I'm in your masterclass again. So I've been to 3 specifically. I think one was a smaller one in the Banff Whiskey Experience, and then you came to Edmonton from there, did another masterclass, and then 2 with us, essentially with the Alberta Scotch Society. We learn a lot. It's very technical, and for those that are interested, you get to learn a lot. And we have a couple professors in the Alberta Scotch Society, a couple doctors, dentists, and they get right into it. They love the science behind it, and there's nowhere else that they've seen the science to this point. So huge kudos to you. I haven't read the next half yet, and I don't want to. I never want to read the next part before I get to it, because I don't want to ask the questions that belong in the first part in the next.
Sure, but, and I'm not going to overwhelm the audience. And I think, and I hope you reading it as a whiskey connoisseur, it's not too technical either.
No.
And
don't
be intimidated, in other words.
No, there's parts I have to reread, and when you're looking at the science and you're looking at the breakdown, the chemistry of it, that takes a lot of thought and effort if you want to read it. But it's a beautifully done book. So whoever did it, and I know I like pretty pictures, right? It's good, and there's lots of pictures. It's very visual, and I'm a visual guy. As a teacher, I think I have to be kind of and make it visual for my students. So I'm loving it. But I'm going to throw a quote up here. Give me a second.
As you're saying, the editor was the Walkerville Publishing Company. So 2 blocks from our distillery is a local publishing company. So when I approached them on, I said, I wanted to write this book about Hiram Walker and blending and history. Oh my, the partnership that was started, they were so excited. Anything Walkerville, that's where our distillery is, if anybody's in the audience. They went above and beyond, and the pictures they put in there are absolutely gorgeous. And I agree with you. They did a fantastic job. I can't take credit for that. But as they inserted them along the way of the book, it's fantastic. I'm very, very happy on how it turned out.
Well, as an author, I think you'd be impressed with how much effort they put into it as well. I would have liked it better if it was a hardcover, and I think all authors want their stuff in hardcover, right?
Yeah, I know. We debated back and forth, but we wanted people to have access to the information. We didn't want to deter, and that's part of it. maybe someday if the book, but it just seems to steadily sell, and anybody who's curious about whiskey, and that's what it is. So here's the quote. You're going to read the quote?
I'm going to read the quote because I got the full one here. So when I started as a blender, there were no reference textbooks to read and to learn how to blend whiskey. Blending was learned through training and storytelling from one blender to the next. I like the storytelling part, by the way. It was one of the most closely guarded secrets of a distillery. So my question to you was, can you relay one of your earliest, most memorable stories, maybe from this gentleman here, that he told you or someone else told you that kind of typifies this statement?
I actually, not that gentleman, but a gentleman that worked for him. Was a guy by the name of Harry, and Harry, I still know him today, and he's been retired for many years now. But that in the day, he was the working blender. So I have somebody that works for me that does the day-to-day blending. I don't really do that today. And Harry was the chemist that was doing that in that time period. And I was probably 1 or 2 years of my career, and I was kind of curious on what he was doing. And I was a young microbiologist at the time working and I asked him about Harry, what's your job? What's the recipe of making such and such a brand or this brand? He says, only very few people know, and he walked out the door. he really wouldn't tell. It was a very closely guarded secret, even between departments and internally in that time. They had, and it wasn't electronic, it was all in books, and there was only 4 recipe books around the entire site. So it was kept in certain people's offices, and that's the way it was. And they wouldn't never tell how or what it was, and it was a very bizarre thing. But I think that was the culture of the day, is that the recipes were very closely guarded, and that was the case. Now, when I went under Dave Doyle as a blender, and Mike Booth, those were the 2 blenders that were kind of there during my time period. Though they had the days of doing things, and Mike Booth, he unfortunately, from his career, he was going through the 80s and 90s and early 2000s, and that's where Canadian whiskey sales declined by 40%. That was his era. Unfortunately, he was in the era where vodka started to come through in the 80s and 90s, and his innovation world for him was a great storyteller, Mike. He knew his whiskey quite well, but his innovations were basically around age, because you were stuck with a lot of inventory and anything that was released by them at the time. David Doyle, who had his hand in making the Weiser's Legacy you're drinking there, was based off my PhD studies, where we're starting to use brand new barrels for the first time in the Canadian whiskey industry, or at least in a long time. And he brought the Canadian whiskey era into the digital age. Dave wrote many programs on blending and automation control systems as a blender. He put our formulas digitally, and all that information you can find it. I mean, he was a master at it. He was absolutely a master at it. And these are the stories that I continue to tell, and I tell our blenders that work for me today. These are what these people did to the industry. We each have their own statement on what we're doing, and maybe Dr. Don's is writing a book and inventing peated quarter casks and bringing things to life. I mean, we all have our own statements along the way, and I think that's very important. And I'm glad you quoted that, Dolph. That is the best way to train a blender, is even writing it down. It's storytelling. Storytelling is so huge. We know that as human beings. It has been doing it for 4,000 years, right? Storytelling, right?
No, I agree. And well, in the class, students tend to want you to tell stories, so you get you off topic, so you're not really talking things. But people do enjoy that. Everyone loves a good story, and they like to be brought into it. And when it feels like you're part of something bigger. You're brought into the fold when this happens. So I was wondering who did that mostly for you, and we got our answer. It's fantastic.
Yeah, I picked the best, and I think that's one of the things as a blender, you got to pick the best skills and things that you see in the people that surround you, and then it comes to life when you become the blender, right?
All right. Well, this is one of your legacies here. You just talked about your legacy. This is one of them. And you and I have talked about your whiskey wheel on several occasions. So email, text, tastings. We talked about it in person, and I asked and received your permission to use this during my Tuesday night Canadian whiskey journey YouTube, Facebook thing, just like tonight broadcast. And I finally decided to not use it because I wanted it to be all about the distillery we're doing. But what's really neat is I still use this in many cases to guide me when I'm tasting other Canadian whiskeys. It does. So I'll pull it out. I've got here my desk, and this is my little area that I do, just to kind of focus my attention. And I've been drinking a lot of whiskey. I've been trying to develop my taste for a while, but it's still something great. So if anyone out there gets a chance to get one of these, so you can get it in the book. But if you go to a tasting with Don, you inevitably give people one of these, I think.
Yeah, you can buy it. Google Dr. Don Livermore and Flavor Wheel. You can get it for free. I mean, it's free to find. And that's a blending cheat sheet. If you really want to look at it from a higher level delf, it's the cheat sheet of the book. It's the cheat sheet of the book.
Anyone can become a blender if they could understand it well enough. There you go. That's good. My question, though, would you agree that this flavor wheel is more specific to the whiskey you make? So in other words, do you think that other distilleries could possibly make their own flavor wheel that more closely matches their own? You know what I mean? Could they?
Yep. Absolutely. I've challenged industry people. I think it's the template for whiskey wheels or flavor wheels, quite honestly. I think that it really starts in the center of that wheel. This is where you draw flavors from whiskey. In the center of the wheel is the yeast, grain, or wood. In the case of Canadian whiskey, we can use wood. If I had a bourbon wheel, it'd have to be white oak. I mean, but Canada, we can use whatever wood we want. And then the second ring of the wheels are things that we can manipulate. So I can change the grains around from corn, wheat, rye, or barley to get, or malt, and the grain can spoil. I have that on there as well.
Yeah.
I can change the fermentation conditions around, and yeast can make that green grass, herbal kind of notes, fruity, floral, soapy, sulfur notes. In terms of barrels, you can burn the wood in a certain way to get certain flavors. You can finish, age, and get certain flavors. The third ring of the wheel is what you care about. And when you do tasting, Dolph, is those are your flavor descriptors. And the outside ring of the wheel is the things I care about. Those are the things I measure on a mass spectrometry, GCMS. So if I get a banana taste of my whiskey, it's isolamine acetate, it's a fruity flavor, and yeast has made it. So it is a template. And that's kind of what I envision in the world going to. It's designed specifically for Canadian whiskey because we're rye heavy. A rye forward tends to be Canadian whiskey, but I would love to see a bourbon wheel. I would change a few things around, but bourbon wheel would have something slightly different, but the methodology should still be the same.
Yeah,
rum should be the same. So take the grain off the wheel and put molasses. All right. If it was wine, you'd take grain off the wheel and you would put grape. Right. So
that'd be a big wheel with all the varieties of grape too.
Yeah, but you could probably make a white wine, red wine. You really could. And I think it should be the template or the standard for whiskey wheels. And I don't know if industry's there quite yet. Maybe when I'm long and retired, people will come back and use this as a reference point. Yeah, maybe this is how these things should be spelled out. So because it's people like you, Dolph, that people are curious about what we do. Right? Yeah. I'm curious, where does your flavors come? Like, it's not where your ingredients come from. They now really care how those ingredients get into our product. And I think that wheel certainly brings light to a blender's mindset. Yeah.
Well, it's helped me a lot, and it still does when I talk to other distillers, and I refer to it. It's good. And one of the funnest things you did for me, though, because the outside edge wasn't as interesting to me. I know that. And I asked you to give me one of these that had just the 3 levels, and you did that for me, and I blew that up. And I've used that in tastings as well. But there's a limit to the tastings you can do this with. There's people I just want to drink the whiskey to enjoy it, and then there's times where you want to decipher, you want to pick it apart, right? And so with those friends, that works perfectly. However, I do have friends within Alberta Scotch Society that want the 4th, so they could refer to it, and they understand it at a higher level and a better level than me, because I'm a taste, and it's but I can appreciate the whole thing. That's good. Thank you. Anyway, we're going to dissertation. So I've got dissertation over my shoulder right over here. I didn't bring it up, but it's proof at 46.1. I've got another quote. Might as well throw the quote up.
Sure.
Right. There we go. Each atom has its own molecular weight. If you count the carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, ethanol molecule, it adds up to a molecular weight of 46.1. I want to know if you came up with this designer percentage.
Yes.
That's your baby.
Yeah. Yes.
All right. Excellent.
J.P. Weiser's dissertation was the first rare release, I think, that I was truly involved with some kind of rarity inside of our organization. I know we did Legacy and things like that and Red Letter, but the first hand was Dr. Don's dissertation, and it's my PhD in a bottle. There were 78 barrels left over from doing my PhD on how infrared measures the inside of a barrel. And when the LCBO approached me, can we do a rare release for our province? And yes, sure. I got these 78 barrels left over. Do you want it? Yeah. Let's make a blend. It ended up being the world's top blended whiskey as a rare release. I think it was 2016, 2017, somewhere in that point. But the blender, Scott, that he makes me look good. We're sitting back and forth. And we went back for days saying, what proof should we put this at? And I said, 43 is the original strength of Canadian whiskey, as you'll get into the chapter next week, Dolph.
Okay.
Or we could go to 45% like Legacy, or we thought about 48 because I think it was 48 at the time. Some Easter egg. And finally, I came into my office when I remember vividly, and Scott and I said, I know what the strength should be. It should be 46.1. And he goes, why the F? Why the F do you want it at 46.1? I don't understand it. And that hence what the quote you put up. Yeah, if this is about education and dissertation, let's make it 46.1. The cool part, Dolph, have you seen my Blending 101 course that I put on, or you've seen pictures of it, I think?
Yeah.
Yeah, I lined up all the, and I probably have done that course with 300 people or so. I averaged out all the alcohol strengths that people put their blends on, Dolph.
Okay.
You know where it landed?
Pretty close to that.
46%. It was 46.0, but I don't know if there's something to 46.1. Is that the perfect strength of whiskey? I don't know. Okay. I just here's storytelling again. I don't.
That's mythical. I love it. I love that. Okay, good. And you have a lot of Easter eggs in your different bottles as well. And one of my favorite series is with the hockey players, all the hockey player ones.
Oh yeah,
the alumni series.
Yeah.
And you do that. You play with the percentage with the series, and it just makes it fun. It really does. And when you see a weird percentage on it, you're thinking, "Oh, that means something. I gotta look for it." And yeah. At times it was just the area code for Toronto, I think, was one of them for you.
That was Wendell Clark's. But you said it, Dolph, and I like the word. Maybe you kind of glossed over it, but you said it's fun.
It is.
Said it is fun. Isn't that whiskey?
Yeah, it is.
The convivial moments you have with your friends and colleagues and people you learn and meet along the way, and tell those odd storytelling things. That's what whiskey is. Yep. It should be fun.
It memorable.
It should be fun, right?
Fun, Yeah, and memorable because it's fun, and that's it is. And the best whiskeys I've ever had in my life is not. They possibly weren't the best whiskeys. It was the best company, and that's the memories that comes with it, right? So, and I can think of my favorite whiskeys in the past, and it's only because the night that I was, or day, I guess, when I was drinking these whiskeys, it was because it was such a phenomenal time with individuals, and that's what emblazons it on your memory. It's not the whiskey itself; it's the people you're sharing. Because if I'm in my house, well, it's the whiskey, but I can open up your 35-year-old and I could sit there and enjoy it over a couple hours and try to decipher what the flavor is. But really, it's not memorable until someone else is there with me and we have the fun with it. Yeah. So friends and family, that's it. And friends and family with whiskey, it's what you should be doing this Christmas season if you can. Yeah. And I'm going to keep going. I'm going to go. Another quotes away. Yep. I had lots. Here we go. So we concluded that the type of grain preparation, whether it's roller mill or a hammer mill, influences flavors in the final whiskey, which I thought was really cool. I didn't know that. Yeah. It makes sense. It really does if you think about it, but I never really thought about it. We now buy a form of dehulled barley where grain processor removes the husk through an abrasion process. The spirit produced using the dehulled barley is more bready, biscuity, smoother tasting, similar to Scotch Irish whiskey styles. So I need to know, and it's kind of a two-part question. When did you figure this out? Did you figure this out, or did you get this information from your other Pernod Ricard brethren, so people from Powers, Redbreast, Jameson type thing, Green Spot, did you get that information from them? Because I was wondering how much information went between Pernod Ricard's different distilleries, because you were saying that it's closely guarded secrets, and I still thought they were, but I was hoping you share.
Yeah, I figured it out.
Okay.
Yeah. So it was really by mistake, and typically we haven't dealt with a lot of barley than using it during as a malt for enzymatic purposes. I know that's a little sciencey and geeky. That's the only time we've ever used barley all the way through, but we're now fermenting each grain separately: corn, wheat, rye, barley, etc. And the first time probably we did barley is probably the early 2000s, and we just could never get it right. And it was like, it had a bite and an astringency to it. We were never happy with it. It was just not right. And I finally, I think a lot of it was because of the education that I did. Doing a master's and a PhD, you learn a lot about a lot of different things. You go from beer to single malts to whatever. And I said, how do my friends that make single malts and Irish whiskeys, like Redbreast, what are they doing differently? And then just, I don't know, dawned on me one day. I said, geez, they use a lauter tun. And what is the purpose of the lauter tun? It's to remove the husks. That's what lauter tuns do. And I'm not sure if the audience know what one is, but they remove the husk right from the very, very beginning. And the other thing I equated it to is the beer world knows that if husks get into their beer, and if their lauter tun is not working properly, it gives a real bite to the beer. They really do understand that that's an issue for them. And then I said, well, maybe that's an issue for us as whole grain mashers, right? We put all the grains in together and run it through our still. And I think a lot of those flavors from the husks come into our product. We know it does for rye. Why wouldn't it for barley? So I think there's those astringency bites that you would get in the beer that the beer people are very conscious about. Whether the Irish and single malt producers were doing it consciously or not at the very, very beginning, I'm not sure. So this is where we now found, it's called pot barley. You know, the soup, barley soup? Yeah, they actually removed if you look at the little barley kernels in there, that's the old barley, right? So we did a run of that, and did it ever make a world of difference?
Now, do you think
so we learned by mistake. We learned by mistake, trial and error.
I think it might be because you didn't. It wasn't malted. Because if it was
malt has its whole. Malt has its own. No, malting, they do still take out the husks.
Okay. Well, it's crushed and it filters through the husk, right? But
that's right. And those flavors don't make it way in. So, and then I believe in the part of the book. I haven't read the book in a while, but I do challenge: is it better to do a whole grain mash, or is it better to do a clear wort? What's the right answer? I don't think there is a right answer. I think they're losing flavor opportunities
either way
by making a clear wort. But then again, are you removing undesirable flavors? I don't know. It depends what style of whiskey you want to make. I can actually now that I've done barley like this, and I'll tell you, Dolph, when I pick up bourbon, I did it with a friend last night. I picked up a bourbon. I said, they don't have a lot of barley malt in this mash bill. I can tell the flavor.
Well, they usually
just because
hit 5%. If they don't want to use enzymes, it's 5%, right?
Yeah. But ones that do a lot more, actually. I did a tasting of a really famous bourbon that was from the 1970s last Christmas with a friend. And I said, oh, man, did they put a lot of malt in this. And I did a side-by-side with one that was made today. And it's like, you could tell. You can tell the flavor that husk gives into your whiskey. And I don't care for it, to be quite honest with you. So we started into that direction, and I hopefully in about another 5 or 6 years we'll come out with a single barley whiskey that's out of this world, and I'm very confident that we can. So far, it looks really good.
So you've used malted rye in the past, but I'm wondering if 100 years ago you've read something where the malted barley was in somewhere within Lot 40. Gooderham and Warts or
Lot 40 wasn't invented in 1998. We did use rye malt at that time. The problem with malt, and I don't know if this is true with the maltsters or not, the beer people will spec their buying of malt based on a compound called dimethyl sulfide. It's called DMS for short, and it gives a cauliflower broccoli note to your whiskey. It's garlicky, cooked vegetables. So when we do 100% whole grain malt inside of our distillery, yeah, it just turns out the dimethyl sulfide note is just out of this world. And I think the form of distiller's malt has a high level of dimethyls because we don't spec for it usually, because copper usually takes care of it in the still, but they're very careful about it in the beer world. So I'm not a big fan of malt because of that characteristic, actually. You can smell cauliflower, and I think it's on my whiskey wheel. You'll see malt and dimethyl sulfide, but it can be a issue when you use a lot of malt in your mash bills.
You also said that if you have, if you distill, was it distilling at a higher temperature and you have the enzymes, you get that same flavor? Well, no, it was garlic, I think you came up with. Is this in the same family? Is this the same thing?
If I distill at a high temperature,
or was it when you're making the wort? Maybe when that was at
the
a
whole
higher
grain mash, yeah.
I think that maybe that's where.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So at higher. Okay. Yeah. Sorry. Dimethyl sulfide can come from two places. Sorry. Now I know where you're going with it to just educate. So dimethyl sulfide is a problem in malt, in the way the maltsters make it. The second place is yeast can make it under stress.
Okay. Yeah.
So the higher the fermentation temperature, yeast will make sulfur under stress.
Got it.
Yes. So that can be an issue as well. We as distillers will ferment very hot. I was actually at a brewery on Friday this week, and I was talking to the master brewer for them, and we were talking about fermentation differences between distillers and brewers. And I said, and I told him, what do you think we ferment at? Oh, you probably ferment very hot, 24 degrees Celsius. I said, no, we ferment about 32 to 35. He goes, holy shit, that's a high temperature, but because they know they'll get sulfur issues the warmer the fermentations. It was very unusual for him to ferment at such warm temperatures. We don't mind as distillers because we know copper is going to take care of it, or the black part of the barrel will. One or two places will take care of the sulfur, so it never becomes an issue to us unless the stills are not cleaned properly or you have poor quality barrels.
Okay. All right.
Sorry, I'm getting a little geeky on you there, Dolph.
No, that's what we wanted. And the enzymes. So there's no link between enzymes and the not sulfur, but the garlic taste. I thought
no, not at all. From what I can tell, my experience is I don't see enzymes becoming any issue for flavor in whiskey. Okay. They get denatured in the distillation process and it'll end up going out in your cereal products, your distillers dry grains. So I've changed enzymes around many times, many different formats, many different ways for my career, and I don't see that causing flavor issues from what I can tell.
All right.
Somebody's going to tell me they have somewhere, but I haven't seen it.
Well, and there's so many ways to get so many different flavors. We get that from the book. So maybe if they do get it, maybe they're doing 3 or 4 things differently than from what you were doing.
Yeah, and it may be subtle, and it may have a small impact. As other things have bigger impacts probably to your final whiskey blend, right?
Yeah. All right. Well, let's stick with fermentation. And you say fermentation's the heartbeat of the distillery. You quote that. And you have a 3-day fermentation. So you state that ultimately quick fermentation and I'll read that, healthy yeast promote high alcohol concentrations. But when you hear distillers or brewers state that they have a 5 or 6 day fermentation, are you thinking you're not saying it, but you're thinking in your mind, what a waste of time or what a waste of money, or you're doing something wrong? Is that coming in, or you're just thinking maybe you're searching for some of the flavor that
I think it's probably just how their equipment is sized and timed.
Okay.
There's always a bottleneck in your distillery where you can only process so much. Our bottleneck is distillation time. Our stills can only process so much. So, and when I hear somebody say 5 or 6 days, it's probably based around how fast they can distill.
Oh, got it.
Yeah. I really, that's probably how they've set up and timed things out. So, of course, you're right when you do say it is time and money. Yeah, you got time and money sitting in the tank. It's got cash on the books, if you want to call it that. So, we do like to get their fermenters done as quickly as we can, and there are ways to do it. Temperature is one way. The other thing is, and most people don't realize it, do talk about it in the book, is a limiting factor for yeast growth is nitrogen. Yeast cell is 50 some percent protein, which is nitrogen. So you need it to grow faster. You got to give it nitrogen, just like growing your grass at home, Dolph. you put it.
But then when you give it too much nitrogen, what can happen?
Well, yeah, you can get burnout, but I'm telling you, you have to put a lot of nitrogen into it. It becomes not even cost effective if you put that kind of nitrogen level in a fermentation. So now the thing is, if you were to put a lot of nitrogen, which probably what yeast growers will do. So the people that do grow yeast, they'll put a lot of it would just promote growth instead of making alcohol. Okay. So you do want to stress the yeast a little bit to start making alcohol as opposed to making another yeast cell. That's what you're doing there, right?
Okay. And I use it actually. It's just yeast food that you're putting into it. Essentially, is what you think. I make a Doffelbock, and it needs to be a 9%. So you can't stress the yeast too much. It's a dark beer. It's a heavy beer and beautiful flavors. You still don't want to stress these too much. So you're still giving it the nitrogen, and it's cheap as borscht. You don't even know how cheap it is, but you start talking to other brewers, and it's really important to stop those off flavors. And for me, the off flavors. Is a cardboard-like flavor, and I don't know if you've talked about that too much in there, but that's the flavor that I get when I stress the yeast for the Doppelbock.
Yeah. So probably that's a compound called diacetyl. I call it buttery. Some people perceive that as a cardboard kind of note. Yeast will produce that. I find it a defect in beer, and as I think most people do, find cardboard notes as a defect in beer, and you don't want it. No, you don't want it. And same thing with my whiskey. Once in a while, I've seen it through the years. Oh, geez, it smells like a buttery rum. It's something happened along the way. Why did the yeast get stressed? And then you could kind of go back and figure out what had happened. Yeah.
Yeah, for me, it's kind of a stale flavor is what I relate it to, and I want to get rid of that. Is there a point in time, and you've played with different times, is there a point in time where you thought about going to a 4-day or stretch it to a 5-day?
Oh, yeah, we did 4 or 5 days. You can't tell.
Okay.
It doesn't. I think if you start stretching it out probably into 7 to 14 days, then yeast then starts doing some funky things. If we go from 3 to 7 days for us, you wouldn't be able to tell. Distillation takes care of a lot of things, Dolph.
Okay.
Yeah.
Could you picture something that you would want, a flavor that you would want that would help out one of your blends for something with a much longer distillation? Is that
distillation or fermentation?
Sorry, fermentation. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think the rum producers do some interesting things, and I thought about doing a PhD on this when I was debating about my topic. Is if you could stress yeast, so there's a reaction in distillation. It's called the Fischer reaction. Okay. And the Fischer react. Yeah, do I talk about it in the book? I think I do.
Very small, a little paragraph, but it's
but the Fischer reaction is when alcohol or ethanol is heated with an acid, you get the corresponding ester. Okay. So if you had butyric acid, which smells like butter, rancid butter, it's awful. It would smell awful in your fermentation, but if you were to distill it and through a still when you're boiling it very hot, it makes it into ethyl butyrate, which smells like tutti frutti.
Okay, good for some people.
So I've and this is where if you get probably you've had rum producers on the show. If you don't, you should. Where they actually have dunder, where they actually don't even pitch it with yeast. They pitch it with the older fermentations, which now have got this microflora of bacteria and other things that make these acids. So then you can then it makes real funky acids, funky smells. But when they run it through they turn it into beautiful fruity flavors. And I thought, wow, what if you can actually start controlling something like that inside of a whiskey fermentation? It smell like it's a hell of a science project, Dolph. But if you can actually control it,
you're the guy to do it.
And I never ever did it, but there's just lots of things and lots of ways to make it go wrong. I want to start out in small levels first, but you can make some of these. You can make some very beautiful. What would be normally a defect if you were to drink it in your beer. But firing it through a distillation, it would just totally change it and convert it into interesting esters.
Excellent. Well, I think we should experiment.
There you go. I don't know whether those experiments would be good or not, but
it doesn't matter. It's just the experiment. It's the fun in the experimentation. And when I do it, it's a hobby. It's fun. And for you, it's money and it's time and it's taken away from something else.
And it comes to product development. I probably talk about it a little bit here too. I would be probably way ahead of the curve in what consumers want. I think I probably mentioned them in, I don't know which book I do mention it at some point that most consumers don't even know yeast makes alcohol. So
that's in this one, the 101 written.
Yeah. That's the problem. I said sit down in a corner bar stool in a bar and I start talking about yeast. I would turn people. They sleep, right? But at some point, I think people will understand. You're starting to see signs of it in the wine industry. People will ask them, "Is this made from a wild yeast or not?" Right? So they're asking that, and you're talking about probiotics now. You're asking that about your yogurt, right? You're starting to see gourmet bread be made with unique yeast strains now. How much longer will it take to catch up in the distilling industry? Right?
Okay.
It's timing. Today it's barrels. People get barrels, understand barrels. They like finishing. Yeah. I think grain's going to come next. I don't know if we're going to talk about grain here in a second, but I think grain is going to be a hot topic with consumers in the next 5 or 10 years. I hope yeast will be someday.
Well, because the grains, we talk about it with Brooke Laddie and what they've done, and these guys right up here from Ireland. So a lot of them, their own grains, and they're trying to talk about the terroir with it as well. So and that is coming up and more. But you're right, yeast does not come up, but it does come up in the beer world quite a bit, and especially those talking about Belgian beers and the yeast coming out there. And I have a great comment here from the Canadian Whiskey Smith, because it's a great segue into my next one. A catalog of old yeasts. So you are remembering correctly, and my question is, and I'll lead into this for a second. So how detailed are the notes left from your past brewers, distillers, blenders in relation to brewing, distilling, or your ancient yeast? Because I thought that was a really cool part of this. Strains that you said you have from 1930s to the 1960s that you can reanimate. So are they detailed enough for you that you could do it? Or do you think you would still have to experiment a lot no matter what to reanimate these and integrate it into your whiskeys?
I don't think it would take the right partnership with a yeast company to do it. I would probably lean on their expertise to probably crack the lyophilized cultures open. They're lyophilized means they're dried in a dried state, and bring it to life. And I have worked with a partner on it, and they could get them to grow, and they're quite excited about it. It's just a matter of scalability for us right now. It's an experiment for me is 300 barrels. That's a hell of an experiment if it fails, right? So I'm kind of working through those details. Is how do we bring it to life and make it be 6 barrels at a time, kind of thing. So kind of stepwise fermentation. So yeah, it's doable. I really want to do it before I retire. Is to have the next generation of blenders have it in their inventory to work at as these unique yeast strains. And the notes are there. You can tell they came from Goodham and Warts or Hiram Walker or Corby. Wisers, you can see them all there. I got old breweries that aren't even around anymore, old wineries I've never even heard of, old distilleries I've never heard of. I don't know why Hiram Walker collected them, or the scientists that did that. I've no idea. They're there. I mean, let's do it. I'm all for it. Yeah. Now what flavors do they make? I have no idea. I know where the yeast strain came from and what organization had it. After that, I don't know. I don't know anything else about it.
Okay, so it's all going to be playing for you. It's good. We're talking about notes and the passing down of notes and the heritage. I think that's really cool. And I'm wondering how specific are the notes that you make when you're creating something, or failed experiments and the ones that go well for your predecessor, or not the people coming after. How detailed are they? And do you think about that a lot when you are doing this?
Yeah. Yes, I do. So my notes are detailed. I mentioned my predecessor, Dave Doyle. He was a brilliant blender, bringing to life the digital side of whiskey and whiskey making. So we have databases now. Everything's on a computerized system. All our recipes, all our formulas, any information you're looking for on our blends, tasting notes, experiments that we had done that have failed and passed. They're there. And I can certainly attribute Dave as spearheading that sort of thing, and we've just continued on with his legacy of doing that. Yeah.
Nice. And if you do get into the specific yeast, I'm wondering how scared you are of contamination of one yeast in relation to what you.
I'd keep it isolated. I'd keep it isolated. I keep it isolated. Yeah. And the thing is, we use fresh yeast every fermenter that we make. So we don't even recycle yeast like you would in the beer world. I know we use fresh yeast every time. We've tried doing things like that in the past and in different ways of growing yeast and propagating it. We always come back to the final conclusion: fresh batch of dried yeast for every fermenter is the way to do it. So I'm not concerned about that whatsoever, Dolph.
So you know what you're going to get though when you do that, but you can't develop your yeast strain to change the flavors in that direction, right?
That's right. You couldn't. No. I want to be consistent. I want to be consistent with the blends and the distillates that we make. I know I want to be assured what's going into barrel is going to make Weiser's Deluxe the next time, right? So that's part of the reason why you work that way. It is a cost. It's a yeast cost is a lot of money to us, but that's the cost of doing business and making consistent products.
Okay.
That makes sense.
No, it does make sense. I interview a lot of micro distillers and the experimentation for them is fun, but it's fun for you as well, I can tell, but they're not spending, like you said, you're not dealing with 400 barrels. You're dealing with 1, 2, 3.
Yeah, 400 barrels is a hell of an experiment to go wrong.
It's a little bit different.
So talk about that barley experiment I did. So that's what I did. So now I got to find a home for that experiment that I did. And
as it ages and
as you know, everybody knows that we do sell third-party whiskey. So that ultimately probably where that'll end up in a blend with somebody that has some desire for it. But that there's ways, and worst case scenario, you have to redistill it if it's a really bad experiment.
Yeah,
it becomes vodka at that point, Dolph.
Oh, that's a shame. It's an expensive vodka, is what that is.
It would be.
Okay.
That rarely happens. So
okay, good. And another quote. There we go. And you've said this so many different times. I've heard this. Don't ask me how much rye is in my whiskey. Ask me how much 4-ethyl glycol is in my whiskey. So, could you explain this to us and how this was important? How other grains can be mistaken for rye in the distillate prior to aging, which I think is really cool. And you at one point said you can make just about any grain taste like rye. So this all comes together in one.
Yeah, that's a big masterclass. That one.
It is, and we're going to talk about. Anyways, and you don't want to give away the book. People can buy the bloody book. Buy the freaking book. But give us just a tidbit.
Just a tidbit. So, when we look at flavor, it kind of goes back to that roller mill and hammer mill that you talked about.
Yeah.
That's the husk of the grain is fiber. Fiber is made up of cellulose, hemicellulose, and lignin. They're very big molecules. And the thing is, if I look at the grain rye has a high lignin content. And I'll describe it as a brick wall. Cellulose and hemicellulose is the bricks. Lignin is the cement. Okay, so it ties it and sticks it all kind of together. When we actually ferment and distill and cook inside of a distillery, it busts apart that lignin molecule into individual building blocks. Yes. So you can see breaking apart lignin. That's in a wood, but it's the same thing. So you're busting that lignin into very, very small molecules, and then it goes in and gets distilled. So when we
if you look at this picture, which one's the lignin? So it's the connector. Is what it is.
It connects thousands of those molecules together, right? But when you heat and cook, it busts apart into that molecule you have there on the screen, right? Yeah. So the thing is, rye has a lot of lignin. Mm-hmm. We're doing a lot of distillation. We're doing a lot of cooking. Therefore, you're going to get a lot of 4-ethyl glycol in your distillate. And this is what makes rye different than barley and wheat and corn. You're going to get a lot of this stuff. Now, the thing is, we know exactly the boiling point of this compound. That's what distillation is all about. You can separate molecules based on its temperature of boiling. And one of the things I'll say is, okay, I got a lot of rye, but the thing is, if I distill it in a certain way, I can remove 4-ethyl glycol and still call my whiskey 100% rye. You can strip it out and make light whiskey that's 100% rye, and distillers are absolutely correct. Yep, this is 100% rye whiskey, but when you taste it, I don't taste any of that spicy 4-ethyl glycol. No. So we are brewers as well as distillers. And you've got to be very, very careful when you ask a Canadian whiskey producer, okay, how much rye is in this whiskey? The second question you got to ask is, how is it distilled? If they say we double column distill it, you strip it all out. There's no flavor there. If you single column distill it, you keep it. The thing is, and this is what with Law 40, we column and then pot distill it. That actually concentrates up 4-ethyl glycol. Distilling, there's more than one part to it. There's more than grain. There's brewing and distilling.
Right.
There's two sides, and that's what I mean by this quote. Is be careful. This is the art of distilling and then ultimately blending it out. Now I can bring in 4-ethyl glycol on how I can burn a barrel too. If you burn a barrel a certain way, I can bring it in that way, and I could have 100% corn light whiskey. But if I burn a barrel, I can bring in a lot of 4-ethyl glycol that way, and you couldn't tell the difference.
And we're going to
you can't tell where it comes from. You can't tell where it comes from. Yeah, you can't tell where it comes from.
Compared to the 4 millimeters.
Yeah.
It's so, you know what? I'm going to wrap this up because we're going to take a 5-minute break and then come back to the after dram, and we're going to have a couple gentlemen with us. So Don DeMonte's been commenting on the side, and he'll be there. He's from Last Straw. We also have Grant Stevely from Douglas. He's in England right now, so it's
is he? Okay.
It's about midnight for him, so he's going to come on this as well. So this will give us a chance to just kind of wrap everything up. So I'm going to do my conclusion. We good?
Sure.
Did you have any last comments before I wrap this up, sir?
Yeah. So you said buy the book. So those who are watching, go to the place where you buy it is jpweiserstour.ca, and it is available worldwide. You should go to the checkout cart and the link, and then you can pick up both books. It's $30 a piece, depending where you are. They'll ask for a shipping cost to it as well. They're great reads, and the feedback I'm getting is fantastic. And that's jpweiserstour.ca. If you want to follow me on social media, I'm on LinkedIn, on Instagram, and Twitter at CDN Whiskey Doc. You can see what the life of a blender. I know I got many followers. And I think that's about it. So
we're going to talk a lot more in the next hour after this.
Yeah.
I
was going to say the other thing is if you do buy a book, there is a comment section on checkout. If there's any comments to this and you want your book signed, just say, please get Dr. Don to sign your book.
And he does.
I don't know if I signed your book. Yeah, there you go.
You did too. Both of them. We're good.
Yeah, so I will sign the copies of the book on checkout if you do buy a book. So I thank you, Dal, for asking me on for the program. I appreciate it.
Well, it's my absolute pleasure. So couldn't be a show without you. It'd be me talking about your book, and then I wouldn't do it justice. So Whiskey Brothers, Whiskey Sisters, Whiskey Friends, that's it. That's the first of our 2 whiskey book club editions based on this book. We're moving our conversation from this, it's more formalized format, to equally engaging, but a little bit more open style in the after dram. So Dr. Don and distiller, blender, owner, friends of mine will be joining us. And really, what else would you rather be doing on a Saturday night than drinking whiskey and talking to some, listening, and you should comment down the side, talking to people who just love whiskey. So we'll be back 5 minutes, this channel, Spirit of Edmonton, for the After Dram. You don't want to miss a minute. Click on the like, click on the subscribe, and cheers to you all. And Don, I'll see you in a couple minutes. See you soon.
Cheers.
All right. See you, everybody.